I too had an opportunity to share with youth that are motivated towards serving their country and making a difference in the world, and they're surrounded by a culture that tells them the best thing to do, the patriotic thing to do, is to join up with the military. So on this Veterans Day celebration in my daughter's high school, in La Center High School, I asked if I might, as a veteran, present some remarks on Veterans Day, and the teacher was open and willing to have me come and speak. And I even gave her a copy of what I was to say, and she still welcomed me. So the previous people to speak were a recruiter and a very gung-ho student who had remarks about serving the nation in the armed forces. And then I was able to go last. So I stood up, and I'd like to share with you the comments I made and then the poem at the end. My name is James Skinner, and I'm a U.S. Navy veteran from 1980 to 1986. During that time, I served as a naval flight officer on an EA-6B Prowler electronic warfare jet. During my sea duty, I served aboard the USS Nimitz and later the USS America in the Mediterranean and the Indian Oceans. I'd like to give you some background as to how I came to serve in the military. I was the son of a World War II veteran and the nephew of a decorated World War II B-24 squadron commander. Two of my older brothers were subject to the draft and served. So, although the draft ended when I was just 16 years old, I mostly assumed that I too would do my service to our nation. My uncle, the career Air Force pilot, had quite an influence in both my desire to fly and to serve in the military. He often let me fly his light twin-engine Cessna as co-pilot on many different occasions. So when the lure of naval aviation beckoned during my senior year of college, naturally, I was eager to join. This was, for me, an opportunity to fulfill a patriotic duty, as well as to see the world and gain experience as a flyer. Like many young people today, I joined the military hoping to make a difference in the world for the cause of freedom. The prevailing Cold War culture at the time was that the Soviet Union was a menacing threat that, if left unchecked, would gradually take over the world. I was idealistic at the time that our Navy was a force for good in the world. I must admit that one of the most positive outcomes of my military service was the ability to see many different foreign ports. Through these port visits, I gained an appreciation of many people who had different customs, but in many important ways were very similar to my own nation and my own family. I remember one particular port visit to Alexandria, Egypt on the Nimitz in 1983. It was my first real exposure to a third world country. Although extremely poor, I saw that they had meaningful lives and occupations. Families, children, aunts and uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers, places of worship, mosques, skilled artisans, and hard-working fishermen. They were kind and generous people. I realized that the United States was not the only place that had good people, and that although this country, Egypt, had been armed by our supposed enemy, the Soviet Union, these folks were by no means my enemy. Toward the end of my obligated service to the Navy, I began to question whether some of the military actions that I could be ordered to participate in would violate my own conscience. Especially as a Christian, I had a hard time reconciling Christ's command to love your enemies, to do good to those who hate you, with my military obligation to obey the commands of the officers appointed over me, right up to the President of the United States. In fact, I narrowly avoided this dilemma of conscience as I made my normal rotation to shore duty just months before President Reagan ordered the Navy and Air Force to strike Libya as a reprisal for a Libyan-sponsored terrorist attack. My own squadron participated in the 1986 raid on Benghazi and Tripoli, which left 2 U.S. Air Force flyers dead and many Libyan military and civilians dead, including Muammar Gaddafi's young daughter. At the time, I felt a weird mix of pride in my unit accomplishing what we'd been trained to do, and yet shocked at my own callousness towards civilian loss of life. When my obligation was up, I decided to leave the Navy and pursue missionary aviation. After almost 3 years of preparation for missionary flying and mechanics, the door eventually became closed to us to missionary flying due to the needs of one of our children. Thus, I embarked in 1990 upon my present career as an airline pilot. Fortunately, I've had the opportunity to serve on short-term mission trips to Ecuador, Mexico, and Canada, even Liberia, Africa. I have found these experiences to be some of the most gratifying of my life. I understand the patriotic motivation to join the military and be a part of what many see as the defense of our country. I also understand the youthful zeal to test what you're made of and rise to a challenge and sacrifice for a cause which is greater than yourself. I've been there. It's a noble desire. But please, young people, think hard and long and be ready to question what that offer of sacrifice is actually accomplishing. Does it promote life and build community, or destroy life and disrupt community? To serve your country in the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, to become an engineer or doctor without borders, to be a missionary to the disadvantaged, both here and abroad. These are occupations that require as much courage and stamina as any military duty, and yet they yield the peaceable fruit of compassion and mercy. In closing, I'd like to explain the origins of Armistice Day, which has come to be known as Veterans Day. As you know, fighting ceased, or the war to end all wars, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. Congress responded to a universal hope among Americans for no more wars by passing a resolution for exercises designed to perpetuate peace through goodwill and mutual understanding, inviting the people of the United States to observe the day in schools and churches with appropriate ceremonies of friendly relations with all other peoples. November 11th is to be, quote, a day dedicated to the cause of world peace. You see, World War I brought such horrific devastation that the original intent of Armistice Day was to work for peaceful solutions to conflict, that the horror of war might not be visited again. I'd like to read now a poem which was composed by me and published in the Veterans Journal a year ago on Veterans Day. On Veterans Day. I was told November 11th was to remember Flanders Field, in hopes that knowing of its horrors, war might be repealed. But now I'm thanked on Veterans Day for the service I have given, yet heart and soul are plagued with thoughts of foreign children suffering. I want to think the bombs and drones have made a safer place, but what I see is homelessness, shock and fear upon each face. I want to tell my captain that this strike had been an error. His curt reply, "You think too much. We're fighting the war on terror." So I wonder if my service could have helped the cause of peace. The money spent on drones and bombs been spent to bring relief. If fear was motivation for overwhelming armament, or profits for big companies in defense establishment. So I reply on Veterans Day, thank your country, Doc, or Doctors Without Borders, Mercy Corps, or the Red Cross, Peace Corps, or missionaries who sacrifice for peace. As for me, I used to be a tool for those who brought much grief. But now I'm thinking clearer, hoping in a better way. Heal the sick and work for peace to honor Veterans Day.